Hello, everybody. This is Craig Watson from the Pacific War Channel, where we cover the entire history of the Asia-Pacific War from 1937 to 1945 and all the major events that led up to it. I'm joined yet again here by my new friend, Gaurav. How are you?
Hey, Greg, great to be back again. I'm really enjoying this podcast, so thanks for tolerating me on this.
No worries. Me too. And today we are talking about something that has really nothing to do with, maybe a little bit to do with the Pacific War, but it's an exciting story. It's going to be an exciting series, and we're going to be tackling it almost kind of like at each event per episode, although there's going to be clusters of battles, and it gets a little confusing later on. But for today, it's the start of the North African campaign, or for the purposes of this episode, it's going to be called the Italian invasion or the Italian attempt at invading Egypt, I guess you could say.
I think that would be the correct term, but it's quite interesting to note how Mussolini came up to this decision, not only from the time he took over power from the king, right, as the prime minister of Italy, but especially like in the events leading up to June 1940, when they started to accelerate, he started like at least aggressively drumming for an invasion. It's quite an interesting take because I think that's just been swept under the rug quite a bit.
Hey everyone, I just wanted to let you know I now have a Patreon account found at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel. Over there you can find exclusive Patreon episodes and podcasts based on suggestions from patrons, and other benefits like early access to all of my content, live hangouts, your name in the end credits, and much, much more. So please go check it out. Yeah, it's actually quite an awkward amount of timing if you think about it too, because, well, for the audience members, I guess, crash course on a bit of World War II in Europe. The invasion of France happens. Italy gets involved in the Southern Thrust. But then Mussolini kind of, I guess you could say, refocuses his efforts somewhere he maybe shouldn't have. And Hitler certainly wasn't happy about it. But I guess, for lack of better words, Mussolini, a lot of people like to say he wanted to recreate the Roman Empire in many ways, to take over the vast
Yeah.
territories that Rome had used to have around the Mediterranean. And there was a lot of stuff in North Africa that looked good to him. There was what France owned over to the west. And then, of course, you have this gem that is Egypt, or more specifically, the Suez Canal. And, well, the oil fields in the Middle East that are just sitting there for, I guess, in his mind, for Italy just to take.
Yeah, I think he did feel like, it was going to be the new Roman Empire because, with the Pact of Steel, Italy was going to be the southern half of the Axis sphere of influence, while Germany would be the northern half, right? So it made sense for him to obviously focus on, North Africa, especially since I think Libya at that time was controlled by the Italians with their 10th Army and also Ethiopia. So they had around 350,000 troops between the two countries. And I think he tried to come in more opportunistically rather than with any sort of concrete planning, because I think he also had a very limited global view as Hitler did. So
Yeah.
he assumed with, like while he did rightly assume that, France will not be getting involved in this. So he does not have to worry about, from Tunisia and, invading Libya from the West. So he could just concentrate on Britain. But he thought, Britain is now going to be a complete walkover because, Dunkirk has happened. The Germans will now be starting their air campaign and invasion talks were going on. So he felt like, it's just a quick victory. And I think one thing I would like to point out, Hitler was actually quite unhappy when Italy declared war in June 1940 because, by the time France was completely on the verge of surrender, the British
Yeah.
were, evacuating. So it's more like he comes in more opportunistically.
Yeah, we would call it
What?
bandwagoning. Yeah.
Yeah, he wants to bandwagon, and I think he just wanted a few thousand people dead, so that from by Italian troops, so that he can gain some of the spoils of war. And I can see why Hitler would be upset because, like, the Germans have done all the work to win the Battle of France.
And I mean, if you look at a map and you look at Italy's contribution to the Battle of France, it really is like, oh, I put a little toehold over here just to say, hey, can I come to the peace table and get some spoils of war, like you said. It was
Yeah,
it was pretty gross. And yeah, Hitler had every reason to be pretty pissed off about that.
yeah, but I think even if I just wind back time a bit, right? Mussolini, prior to I think June 1940, was quite actually not wanting to have a war in Europe yet. He did want to keep the peace, whereas Germany was pretty more aggressive.
Yeah, of
And a
course.
lot of the and I think it is also stem for one his own belief of wanting to keep the peace for now while Italy built up its strength, which his staff planner said they would not be ready for a proper fight till like 1943 at the earliest. And at the same time, I think he just maybe was a bit relatively more indecisive because I think one thing we should also call out, Hitler had absolute control in Germany. It was his way or the highway. However, Mussolini, while he still was the most powerful guy in Italy, he did not have as much control because the king at that time
The
Italy
king
was
still,
still
yeah.
he still could have sacked him at any point, and that would have really that would have ended their ambitions of the Italians. And for all we talk about Germany's lack of material superiority or resource availability, Italy was even worse off.
Oh yeah. Definitely one of the worst nations during World War II. And I mean, you can't even point out anything. It's across the board. Talking training, manpower, technology, amount of resources, any type of resource too. I can't
I
imagine.
mean,
Yeah,
I think this, like, before I get into resources, I think I'll just want to highlight one aspect that will pretty much, be that sums up their industrial output capacity in World War II. They produced about 3,500 tanks in total in World War II,
yeah.
which, if you compare it to the Battle of France, both the French and German armies alone had that many number of tanks in service at that time.
And what
So
we refer to as a tank and what Italy refers to as a tank are two different things, I'd say too.
true enough, like they did have like, this P-40 tank which came out much later, which was an equivalent of the Sherman, but I think they only made like five or six of them. So,
Yeah. And we're definitely
but
going to get into the specs of it. I'm not one of, I guess you call them tankies. Like I'm not very knowledgeable of like the specs of tanks and all that, but I did get some notes together just to give a comparison because it's very important to the story. The Italians' technological capabilities versus the British is it's unbelievable in this campaign, to say the least.
true enough. And I think like, just continuing with my point with regards to the resources, right? So I think just in the 1939 or so, Italy's output of coal, right? And so this is all in megatons per annum.
Megatons, yeah.
Italy was making, 4.4 megatons, million megatons or however it's called. Then you had like almost negligible amount of crude oil and 1.2 megatons per annum of iron and slightly over 2 for steel. Now you compare this to Great Britain. This is 224 megatons of coal,
Yeah,
12 megatons of oil, crude oil, way more iron and steel. Like I think it's just like a fraction of the resources, and this is like consider the fact Britain has not yet started ramping up rapidly because until towards the turn of 1940, Britain was still pretty laid back, still a proper peacetime economy. So this doesn't really account for like, the rapid rearmament that would be,
certainly doesn't.
undertaken by
Yeah.
the British Empire. So, but, with this much resources, it's quite hard to imagine how they would have, sustained a long war, like even more than Germany.
Well, that was never in the cards. I think Mussolini himself wouldn't have assumed so either. I mean, he was pretty persistent with the two commanders in question trying to get an invasion of Egypt to happen as quickly as possible. Mind you,
True
you had
enough.
mentioned the thing in the forefront of his mind was he had loose knowledge about Operation Sea Lion, which would have been the theoretical invasion of Britain, which to him was always at any moment this is going to happen. So if Britain is getting invaded, or at least if Britain's tied down so much with the Battle of Britain, then no way Britain could possibly defend Egypt, which he'd be very
No,
wrong about.
true enough. And I mean, it's not an incorrect assumption considering, like, the overall troop strength in June 1940 in the Middle East for Britain. And this is like, defending Egypt on two frontiers, plus, defending the Suez and, the Persian oil fields was not more than 90,000 men.
Yeah, I think they
The
only had
Italians,
I think that they only had 40,000 combat ready, and they had maybe another 25,000 or something in training in Palestine or something like that. Like the British were not prepared to actually face a real campaign.
yeah, and they knew that, which is why, it was quite shock. It would be a fair assumption to say that, hey, let's try to bludgeon our way in, because one thing, while most of the senior commanders in Italy, many of the industrialists were not at all in favor of war. And, they also recognized the industrial shortcomings.
Yes.
The another thing was they did not, however, have guys like, like the Germans, like Guderian or Rommel or Manstein, the guys who would be at least proponents of armored warfare or a new way of war. A lot of the Italian commanders, like, when, they studied the effectiveness of the Battle of France, they were like, oh, this will not hold true in the long run. We still believe, like, in the World War I tactics of, like, the massed infantry assault. They are the guys who will do it. So, I think that really does sum up, like, why they had such ineffective commanders, because if this is their attitude towards war, because at least France was still, incorporating, the tanks, all those infantry support roles.
Yes.
And at least it still was a part of their armed forces. The Italians, on the other hand, well, I mean, their tanks were not even going to be doing
Yeah.
that.
Well, you just mentioned, I think something that's important to this story, the Italian infantry were very demoralized from the offset of World War II because, like you said, they actually were very aware of their technological inferiority to just about every single enemy nation they'd be facing. So they came into this war realizing that, yeah, our tanks suck, our aircraft aren't great, I mean, they're not terrible, not great. The Italian Navy, not bad. The Italian Navy could have done a lot better, but they
Yeah.
weren't trained. That was kind of the crux of it. They didn't have a well-trained Navy, nor their submarine commanders. I think I'm not an expert on this, but I think their submarine commanders were actually very green or something. But
Yeah.
yeah.
No,
Okay.
that was also true. And, like, there was a small part of the Italian army that, like, these were, like, kids who been in, like, the fascist Mussolini's, those youth clubs and everything. Now these guys had the bravado and everything,
Yeah, the black
but they
shirts. Yeah, of
still
course.
form, yeah, the black shirts. But, they still formed a small percentage of the army. And even quite a few of them, when they start the training, then or go through the officers academy or whatever, right? Then when you start getting your hands dirty, you start seeing the situation from the ground, you're like, oh boy, we're screwed.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
speaking of the Navy, right? I did a bit of digging up, right? Like, as despite what we talk about, like, the performances of the Italian Air Force and Army, their Navy, at least on paper, was quite a formidable weapon.
Very.
Yeah, I mean, like, their fleet was six large modern battleships, 19 cruisers, 59 destroyers, 67 torpedo boats, and over 100 subs. And it's just confined in the Mediterranean. The and the British, the Royal Navy did still keep a sizable force that was operational, right? So
Of course,
this
they
is
had
around
to
the
because the Italians were abiding by the ancient Mahanian doctrine, still keeping the fleet at being in port,
yeah,
and it would bite them in the ass at Toronto later. But yeah,
true enough. But I think what really goes for the Royal Navy, which, the Italians did not have. I mean, like, not only the Royal Navy, but Britain. Britain controlled the exit points of the Mediterranean. They had
Yeah.
the Suez and they had Gibraltar. Both were fortresses in their own
Yep.
right, very well protected. They also, because they control Malta, which, as we will discuss later in the podcast, I really want to talk so much about that island
Yeah.
and its role that it plays in this entire campaign.
We could do a whole
And,
podcast on it, actually. We probably will.
true, true enough, it deserves it. And, Britain was on very good terms with Greece, one of Italy's biggest enemies in the region,
Yep.
which is also its own thing, its own story. But
Yep.
because of that, Britain could count on, like, the ability to use Crete.
Yeah,
So
true.
they have all these islands across the Mediterranean where they can set up air bases and, refueling or smaller bases for their ships. So even at the start, the operational strength of the Mediterranean fleet of the Royal Navy was seven capital ships, two aircraft carriers, seven cruisers, and 30 destroyers. And
Significant.
there would be, it was a significant force, and it's not the total strength because these are, what I'm quoting, are the operational ships. So
Yep.
there will be more destroyers and all, that were lost or, being repaired. So right now they're not ready for service, but Britain would start to reinforce this fleet, right? And but as you said, they were so green, and the British, as we will discuss later, had a far better crew. And we would
Yep.
see with so many battles that will come through. The Royal Navy always had the number of the Reggio Marina.
Not to go down a rabbit hole, but it reminds me a lot of the situation in the Russo-Japanese War, where you had an unbelievable on paper fleet that went under the Russian command to Tsushima, and the Japanese, they out trained them so much, and they knew how to use superior technology of their day to just absolutely devastate the Russians. And the Russians came into it. They didn't even know how to use proper communications. It was a real showcase of what happens when your men are properly trained. And there's a lot of reasons for it, but I won't get into it. But yeah, the Italians, you can
Yeah.
buy and have these fantastic capital ships, but if you don't know how to use them, and that's it.
Yeah. And I think what also one aspect I just want to call out is, the Italian army, right?
Yes.
Their entire armed forces, even though the country was allocating about 25% of its national budget right now, which is huge, right? Because considering Italy still at this time is very agricultural focused, it does not have industries like Britain, France, US, or even Germany, right? They were just put having, 25% of their budget, and they just could not even keep up with the ships and everything. And at the same time, they have economic pressures because, their debt is skyrocketing at the same time,
Oh yeah.
which
Well,
I guess that's why you need to rush for a quick victory to get the spoils of
yeah.
war per se.
We won't get into it here, but there's people that actually make the argument when you look at causations of World War II. A lot of people point at the accumulation of debt for a country like Nazi Germany or fascist Italy. When you're the leader of the country and you're facing absolute economic turmoil that's going to see you probably get hanged in the streets. One of the solutions is to go to war, and we see this historically
No,
all the time.
it's a big historical trend.
Yeah.
It's happened so many times in the past. But, one critical thing about Mussolini's thinking was he believed just, enlarge the area, the problem is automatically solved, right? It's, it doesn't matter what area, right? Because, hey, you can have like the entire, 90% of the North African plain, but if it's all desert and your enemy controls, like, the water spots, ports, well, I know what I would be taking.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So the
But
audience is probably going to get impatient with us.
yeah,
Also, just to completely acknowledge this, one of the reasons why I chose to do this series is because I'm already currently writing a North African campaign series for Kings and Generals, but it's a Patreon exclusive for the moment. I think I'm on my eighth episode. So I'm actually finishing up what is the Western Desert campaign already, and we're going into the Tunisian campaign, Operation Torch and
Okay.
stuff. But I have so many notes. I have at least 200 pages worth. So I'm going to be basing a lot of this up going over what I had written just as a basis of like where we're at. But to start off, it's important to note that the Italians had just undergone like quite a reorganization of their military overall. So when we're talking about the ground forces, it's right after 36. They're reorganizing into 24 binary. So that's going to be two regiments per division, 24 triangular, 12 mountain, three motorized, and three armored divisions. So they're not the biggest army by any means. I mean, I would call Italy like a second tier power, something akin to Bulgaria, I guess you would say in World War II. But they're playing on the first tier playing field. That's kind of their issue.
Yeah.
And they, like we've kind of alluded to, they have an unbelievable amount of problems. So one of the biggest issues, tanks, motorized vehicles, their wireless communications. All of this is inferior to every single enemy they're going to be facing during World War II. And by World War II's time, 1939, they've got about 16 divisions out of 67 that have been successfully converted into binary divisions. So prior to this, they had, I guess, what you would have said the old system, which I think everyone was using, where it's three regiments,
It
but they
was
wanted
about
to,
three, yeah.
yeah, but they wanted to go on the binary for whatever reasons they had chosen. I'm sure there was a rationale. And so they were already kind of in the process of reorganizing when the battles are going to kick up. So that's not good to go into.
Mhm.
And they're going to lack a lot of what we would call the service aspect of the ground forces. So if you take the Germans, but I guess a better case would be Britain. They had an outstanding amount of the extra servicemen in every sector you can think of, which just complements the average, infantry soldier. Italy's not going to really have this on a large scale, so that's going to hurt their performance. And as far as equipment's concerned, there was modern equipment for some units, not all. A lot of units actually in North Africa are going to have some pretty poor equipment. It's going to be a lot of
Yeah.
outdated stuff. And I mean, you can't even pinpoint anything. It goes from artillery to their tanks, their anti-aircraft guns, anti-tank guns, which I'd argue anti-tank guns are actually the most important thing in the North African campaign. Even for the
True.
Germans, the German tanks weren't the majority. It wasn't the German tanks that were taking down the Allied tanks. As far as the numbers are concerned, it was actually anti-tank guns. So anti-tank guns ended up being the
Yeah.
crucial factor. The Italians had armored cars dating back to 1909. Got a lot of old cars out there. And let's get into the tanks. The first thing that we can talk about is their tankette. So we're talking a little guy. It's the L3. To be more specific, the probably going to mispronounce this, Carlo Veloce L333. So this is a tankette wielded 12 millimeters of armor, which is you might as well not even have
Nothing.
it. Yeah, and it had a single 6.5 millimeter machine gun, which it's great if you're facing infantry, I guess. Some
Yeah.
were actually equipped with an anti-tank gun, but it was a 20 millimeter, so not. I mean, I don't know. To call that an anti-tank gun, it wasn't going to be that useful. For a medium tank, they had some M11s, which were unbelievably bad. So these were underpowered and thinly armored, a little bit more than your armored car. They did have a 37 millimeter cannon, which not bad, honestly. But the real crucial issue is the cannon could barely move. So,
Yeah.
God, without doing hand gestures to kind of like say this as an audio podcast, you're going to imagine a very stationary looking turret where the tank needs to like kind of move itself in order to aim, and it barely like it can't go up or down very much at all. So it's going to be very slow to operate and almost useless just because of that,
There are two things I just want to add about the Italian tank and tankettes. In comparison to the British, right?
Mhm.
While I did some digging up, and the Italian tanks could not carry as many rounds into battle for the
Yeah.
main guns as much as the British tanks. I'm even talking about the cruiser Mark ones.
Yeah.
And even though the M11 had a good operational range of 200 kilometers on
Yes.
full tank load, full fuel load, you know, the L3, right, which was in terms of vehicles the biggest percentage of the vehicles that the Italians had for their armored units,
Yeah.
that had an operational range of just over 100 kilometers. That's it. An armored car with an operational range of 100 kilometers. That's it.
And that's in good conditions. We're talking about the
Yeah,
Western Desert. So yeah.
true enough. But, it does really, just put into fact, like, how badly these equipment were. And I think, one thing that the Italians and even Germans, I mean, the Germans did it a bit, but what like the British did, right? They tried to adapt all their equipment to the desert.
Yes,
Like
yes.
there was like, for example, like the Hawker Hurricane, one of the British fighters. They had a special desert version for this so that it could like, combat the excessive dust that it would see was say someplace like Britain.
Yeah, no, the even for the motors, the British had come up with some ways to keep the dust levels a little bit at minimum because the sand and the dust that would come in it destroyed everything. Like, I mean, even
Yeah.
for the infantry, you could barely see if there was like a sandstorm or something. The visibility was gone. It actually messed up your eyes if you didn't have goggles on and stuff. It
Mhm.
damaged everything because it just got everywhere inside these vehicles. And these vehicles aren't, I mean, not to say today the vehicles are much, much better, but like they'll survive a lot more punishment than some of these tanks actually.
True
And
enough.
just to get back to the M11, to be more specific, I think the turret could go up about 15 degrees and down 15 degrees or something. And like, without if you go on Google right now, anyone listening to this, just look up the Carro Armato M1139 tank. And once you see the turret and the placement of how it is with the hull, you realize immediately this was a very stupid design. And it's really not going to pan out for them. It also had, of course,
Uh,
some machine gun. Oh, yeah?
Yeah, no, even I actually just saw the pictures, like in more detail. I actually thought for a moment that, the top was
Yeah.
uh the main gun, but because that's usually how it is in tanks a bit, because that looks like it would rotate, but then I just realized, wait, that's actually the machine gun, the
Yeah.
secondary armor.
Yeah, the machine gun is all the way on top on this little turret that swivels, but the actual turret is just built into the hull. Yeah, I guess that's what you would say. It's built into the hull, so it can't really move. It's very dumb. It's a very poor design. Something you'd see in World War One. And its armor was very bad. It had about 30 millimeter of steel given wear on the tank, because tanks, their armor is different if it's the front, the back, the underneath, and
The
such.
front is usually the heaviest
Yeah,
or like
exactly.
the most amount. That's why, like later they would say, try to sneak up on the tanks from the rear or the sides because you have a better shot.
Yeah.
And I think one thing we should add in about the M11, it just had space for a crew of three. So,
Mhm.
you had a driver, you had one commander who also doubled as the radio operator. So, communications and not like, spending all of his time analyzing the situation. And then you had one guy to, fire and load the gun.
Oh, and you mentioned it had room for a radio operator, and none of the M11s had radios. Not a single one. It was
Well,
built to have one.
I mean, it was just supposed to be the commander's role, but
Yeah. But as a crucial problem to this is the M11s. They were built and they were designed to carry radios, but they weren't fitted with them. And they were built to withstand 20 millimeter fire, which, I mean, the British are going to be tossing 2 pounders. So these things are like, they're going to be Swiss cheese to something
yeah.
like a Matilda. Uh,
Oh,
a
like,
fort, yeah. Fortunately
yeah,
for
it's
the Italians, they did have, actually, it was the successor to the M11, it was the M1340. It was a little bit better. It's I think it was used probably for the majority of the war for the Italians too. I think probably till 43 it was like their main tank. It was a medium tank. It weighed 13 tons, so actually the M11's called the M11 because it weighed 11 tons, so this one's the 13 tons. It had a 30 millimeter front, 42 millimeter on the turret front, 25 millimeter on the sides, 6 millimeters on the bottom of the tank. So just 6 millimeters of steel armor on the bottom means that this thing was super vulnerable to mines. If it hit a mine, it was done for. And 15 millimeters of steel on top of it. These ones were equipped with radios. They're a little bit faster than the M11s. They had about 125 horsepower, but I mean, these things aren't going more than like 10 miles per hour. So it's crawling towards its enemy. And they use
Yeah,
diesel,
I mean,
which is interesting.
yeah, yeah, and I think, these speeds, we should not really like, a lot of the time these vehicles will not be even going on proper roads
Yeah,
because when
the
you're going in
Western
combat, you'll
Desert,
just be, yeah,
they're not going to be going top speed regardless of whatever the specs are. It's like one of the worst climates in World War II, and certainly for these Italian tanks, it's not going to do well. It had a 47 millimeter turret, which excellent. That's actually going to be capable of doing some damage to even a tank like the Matildas, and it was I'd say overall it was sufficient to take down the British light and cruiser tanks. The Matilda
yeah,
2 is a superior vehicle, so I think you just have to hand it to the Matilda 2 is still going to win the engagement. But it's the M13 is at least much better, had about 3 to 4 machine guns on the side, so it was a more formidable tank, but I mean, you're saying this is the best tank out of the country that has like the worst tanks at the moment. Even worse than I guess
yeah,
Japan.
ouch.
Yeah.
That's all I gotta say, ouch.
Yeah, it's kind of slander.
But yeah, but if you just compare these to the British tanks, right? So Britain had four tank variants available to the Western Desert Force at the time. That is like, the three variants of the cruiser tanks and the Matilda 2s. So, like the cruiser one, it was, I guess, that's I think a proper light tank in the sense it has like, 6 to 14 millimeters of armor like
Yeah.
across. And at least, already you can see the lightest British tank already has more armor at the front than the Italian tank.
Yeah,
And
it doesn't look good.
as you mentioned, right, they had the 2 pounder gun, which, actually like for the folks, it's a 40 millimeter gun.
Yes.
And it had a decent muzzle velocity, that gun, 800 meters per second almost. So especially against this Italian tanks, they have enough velocity to come in and penetrate them. And one thing also about the British tanks, their secondary armament, like not only do they carry more for their main guns, but they also had more space for a larger crew.
Yeah, they did.
So the Cruiser Mark 1, it had 6 crew members in it. You had a commander, a driver, a gunner, and a loader, and 2 machine gun operators. And they had like, 100 rounds of 2 pounder ammunition and 3,000 rounds for the machine guns.
And this, we're talking about the cruisers here. The cruisers are not the main tanks. So for a heavier tank, or what would be called an infantry tank, the British would have the Matilda 2, which
True.
also had the 2 pounder for its turret, which is an anti-tank gun, specifically. And the turret could move by hydraulic motor or by hand, and it could go a full 360 degrees, and it could be elevated -15 to about a +20. So we're
Much better
talking,
range.
yeah, this is insane better. It's almost as if the Italians have to fire blind. There's no comparison.
I
And
think, one thing I should just like, this might just be a great, like, or more like a quite a shock. Like, you were talking about the M13, right? Its engine had an output of 125 horsepower. The Cruiser Mark 1 had an output of 150 horsepower.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
it's
that
fast. It's much more nimble for sure.
it, I mean, compared now, then just think about the Cruiser Mark 3, which had 340 horsepower.
Yeah, there's no comparison. And
Yeah.
just to finish off with the Matilda too, kind of I'd say insult to injury. The front of it had 78 millimeters of armor, and the sides are we're looking at +60. So basically, nothing the Italian tanks can throw is going to put a dent in these things. So you're looking at a situation where if Matilda 2s are coming into contact with any armored vehicles the Italians have, they're done.
I mean, to me, it just sounds like only like, the German anti-tank guns would be like its biggest enemy only, and
Yep.
that's like one weapon. But it literally makes like the Matilda's twos like literally like moving fortresses in this campaign for against the Italians.
And I mean, we're going to get into it in like the further in the series, but there's actually going to be this kind of tendency for one side to have overwhelming tank superiority, and then it switches to the other side, and then switches back. So
True.
when the Germans come over with the Panzers, they turn the tide on the British, and it's the British who are ended up they're going to be lacking. The British get their hands on some American tanks, and then it for a little while it turns the Germans over, and then the Germans end up getting the Tigers, and then yeah, and there's nothing really fighting off the Tigers, so the Germans kind of win that battle. But yeah, and to go through the rest of this, the Italian artillery is it's ancient, it's very old. The infantry are using the Mannlicher Carano rifle, an 1881 model with low bullet velocity, and they have Breddy machine guns, which were prone to jamming, which not good in a desert climate again.
Yeah.
They're going to be facing the British, and the British have the classic weapons, the .303 Lee Enfield rifle, alongside the Brandon Vickers guns, which are very reliable, have been used for a while. And
I think the
as
brand
of
was considered one of like the best machine
yeah,
guns, or as I think like for squad support, like it was very reliable.
yeah, of course. And as of June the 10th, 1940, the North African Supreme Command, led by Balbo at this point, consists of the Fifth Army of General Italio. I don't want to. I'm going to mess up these names. Garibaldi in Tripolitania, and the 10th Army of Lieutenant General Mario Berti in Srebrenica. Uh,
Mhm.
it's not so relevant for this episode, but the Regina Marina has, as we said, great fleet, capital ships, good large fleet of submarines that all lacked proper training, could have been used better. They're not going to be able to support the invasion of Egypt because Italy took the Mahanian doctrine of the fleet in being for the early half of World War II until they're attacked actually a month after what we're talking about, Taranto. Then the Italians will
Yeah.
come out to play, and they do give Britain a bloody nose, but more or less, Britain wins the battle over the
I
Mediterranean
mean,
Sea.
if I would just say like if Britain did get a few bloody bruises and no like a few no, bloody noses, but they delivered a bigger punishment on the Italians.
Yeah, no, the Italian fleet is going to sit out most battles because of this. And there's going to be an unequal amount of Allied convoys being able to get around the Mediterranean, even while
Hmm.
under fire. Whereas when the Axis are moving anything, they're just completely hunted upon by the Allies.
True enough.
And when it comes to aircraft, the Regia Aeronautica, they've got experience because they were fighting in the Spanish Civil War. But since then, they haven't really done anything, so they stagnated a bit. They've got 84 modern bombers and 114 fighters. And then they got another 100 really, really old and obsolete aircraft. These are all, of course, going to be outclassed by Britain, who has the Hurricane. So obviously, Britain's kind of sitting on one of the greatest fighters at the time. To give a
Yeah.
comparison, the Italians are going to be relying on a specific fighter during this. It's the Fiat CR-42 Falco, and this is a biplane. So audience
Yeah.
members think World War One, kind of. It looks a
Just
little
like
older.
I mean, just imagine. I think the best thing is to say, imagine a Volvo One biplane, at least like, and just add nitro boost because these obviously had much better engines. So
Of course.
these Fiats did have a decent top speed of around 400 and 40 kilometers an hour.
Yeah, much like the British swordfish, biplanes, the last of the biplanes in the mid 30s kind of come out. They've been upgraded as far as biplanes can go. They can take on, monoplanes. It does happen. But the CR-42, it's they're basically in the same position as the Americans in the Pacific War at the beginning, where you have the Wildcat versus the Zero Fighter. So because you know your enemy is going to be out climbing a little faster than you and stuff, you're going to just do hit and runs. You're going to try and come into battles at high altitude, try and take something down, and then just leave because you won't be able to fight in even terms. And that's basically what the Italians are going to have to do with the British.
Yeah, I guess you when you know your shortcomings of equipment, it can't fault you for trying to adapt to the situation to the best you can.
Yeah.
Because I think at this point of in the war, right, the Hurricane is on in Europe is only inferior to the Bf 109 and Spitfire. Neither of them are in this theater.
Yeah,
has
and
absolutely
there's yeah.
nothing to fear on in the skies.
Yeah, they're not going to have many hurricanes at the beginning. They're going to be relying, well, the British are going to be relying on the gladiators, but the British even considered the Fiat inferior to the Gladiator. So even that, the British, the what will become the Western, like the Desert Air Force, is going to be pretty overwhelming for now until the Germans get into it. And yeah,
True.
and the Italian 10th Army, so they have the support of Squadra 5, so that's their aircraft
Hmm.
support, and a little bit over 300 aircraft divided into four bomber wings, a fighter wing, three fighter groups, two reconnaissance groups. And reconnaissance groups are actually extremely important for the North African campaign because navigating the desert is a nightmare for armored vehicles. And two squadrons of colonial reconnaissance aircraft because Italy did have colonies, not as much as everybody
Hmm.
else, but they could rely on that. And I don't know if we explained, we've kind of explained Mussolini and why he chose to do this rather outlandish activity. But for Britain, this was kind of extremely important, to say the least, the protection of the
Yeah.
Suez Canal.
Yeah, because that is their link to, not only, supplies coming from their Asian part of their empire, but, considering Churchill had then put a call out to the Dominions to send in troops, right? This would be the point from where, like, the Australians, Indians, the New Zealand, South African troops would start pouring in. And I think one thing also why it might be important, right, is except for the Suez Canal, it was also, I think the British imperial staff, right, the chief of the general staff and all, they decided this is probably the best way they can start training and rearming their men and get them into battle
Yeah,
experience.
yeah, for sure. And they would
So
have quite a few troops that are being trained. I mean, we'll get into it a little bit in Palestine. Yeah,
yeah, so I think, but at the start, I think the reason it was just so undermanned, the entire theater from the British point of view, was probably due to the fear of the German invasion, right?
yes,
As the Battle of Britain raged on. I think it's only after October, right? When they realize that they are going to maintain control of southern England's air. They know that the Germans will not invade. Then they can start, sending in more aircraft, man, material, etc. And by now, Britain has already started ramping up its aircraft production back home, like
yep.
rapidly.
Yeah, I live in Canada. The entire Canadian industry is just there to build aircrafts and other troops, corvettes, frigates, and stuff to help Britain. And I mean, the industrial might, everyone talks about the United States. Canada back then, not anymore. We certainly completely lost our industry. But back then, we were able to build quite a lot. And especially for the aircraft for the British Empire, a lot of it would come through Canada. It would take a while, though,
Yeah.
for the shipments. But once it came in, Britain was sitting on a hefty amount of aircraft.
I mean, I won't even put it like, I think I have to give it to Lord Beaverbrook, who took over aircraft production just in May 1940.
Yeah.
Prior to that, Britain made like, 200 aircraft of all types in a week. Within 6 weeks, the number was like more than two and a half times that.
Yeah. The Allies went
It's
into
like,
full war production, whereas
yeah,
even Nazi Germany, I think not until 44, they were not actually considered full wartime economy. Like they really weren't doing things properly.
true enough. But, it does really just make you wonder like why. I think they just badly underestimated like the British morale. I guess they assumed
Yeah,
that, hey, their army's being kicked off Europe, and now they are willing that they'll probably like just quickly cave in.
yeah.
I guess that was pretty much the hope of Mussolini.
And well, to defend Egypt, the commander in chief is going to be Archibald Wavell, who's a well-known face for the Pacific War, because kind of gets sacked over here, I guess you could say. And he's going to have the
Yeah.
Western Desert Force led at the beginning by Lieutenant General Richard O'Connor. And,
Mhm.
there's an awkward time period because technically, when France falls, it hasn't necessarily completely fallen. So at the very beginning, Italy did have to worry about the potential threat that was France and Tunisia. And France did have 8 divisions in Tunisia, but the handshake deals that end up with Vichy France and the Free France struggle for who's going to get what territory, it ends up just making a demilitarized zone. So Italy basically gets, okay, I can, nothing's going to
our
happen
flank.
here. Yeah.
Yeah, our flank secured. And I think, just to add one point to what when you mentioned General Babel for the Pacific War, I think we'll be seeing two commanders of the Middle East who get sacked and then get
Yeah.
involved in the Pacific theater.
It's actually,
And I
yeah.
do
Yeah.
and I do feel bad because, Babel, I think, was just unfairly sacked because he was playing to the best that he could with the hands that was dealt to him. Like, I'll get into it later. I do have a strong opinion about that, but I
Eh,
don't, but that's,
yeah.
I think, that I think is a comment for, like, the future episodes.
Psst. Hey, you. You ever hear me talk about some great Pacific War movie or documentary like Pearl Harbor Minute by Minute over on Netflix and feel the urge to watch it for yourself? Uh-oh, you live in Japan, and your Netflix doesn't have it? Must suck to be you.
Sucks to be me right now.
Oh wow, season 4 of Demon Slayer is out. Oh wait, I can't watch it on Canadian Netflix, but it's over on Japan Netflix? Whatever will I do?
Oh no, no.
Being blocked from regional content? With private internet access, you too can watch Demon Slayer Season 4 by switching your IP address to Japan.
Yes! Hell yeah!
Why stop with Japan? With private internet access, you can change your IP address to over 84 different countries and every single US state, giving you access to region-restricted content all over the world.
Nice.
Many websites and services like Netflix are only accessible depending on your physical location, but private internet access helps you overcome these restrictions. Think about it. Without private internet access, it's like paying for a TV series and missing out on the latest season. Shots fired, Demon Slayer on Canadian Netflix.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
Ever fear people are gonna find your Google searches?
Banzai! Banzai! Banzai!
FBI, open up!
Private internet access makes sure that those Google searches remain a buried secret, as private internet access encrypts your internet access and has a no logs policy. Think you're safe with the local coffee shop's free Wi-Fi? No, you are certainly not. Private internet access gives you more privacy features than any other software and real-time protection from malware and trackers, giving you peace of mind knowing those Google searches remain seen by you and you alone. Private internet access has a no-log policy that they've defended in court, which means they are not storing any of your browsing data. Hey, are you like me using different devices under one household? Private internet access is available on all platforms and protects an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. I personally use private internet access to unblock movies and TV series from all across the globe, and I sleep easier writing scripts for my YouTube channel and others knowing my data is secure. Look, this is a no-brainer. Sign up with my link in the description of this video to get 83% off, plus 4 months for free, so it ends up being only around $2 per month. Signing up for private internet access is risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and 24/7 customer support is available. So don't forget to click www.piavpn.com/the Pacific War Channel, and a big thanks to Private Internet Access for sponsoring this video. Sure. Yeah, no, definitely Waffle didn't have a good time of it. World War II, he's gonna go from place to place, and yeah, a lot of, I'd say, I don't know if he's seen more negatively than positively. I guess, given the amount I've read about, I guess he's seen more negatively, if I'd have to.
Actually, like, I think it's just due to how Churchill did end up portraying him because he was a very well
True.
respected commander prior to the war.
Yes.
And I think, as you call out very early in the podcast, right? Like, the British had about what, 40,000 combat ready troops
Yeah.
with, support personnel and maybe some 25,000 more getting trained up, right, in Palestine. So he doesn't have much. But however, Churchill will just look at a list back in London saying, yeah, I
True.
have these 8 divisions here. Why are you only fighting with 4? Why are you not going aggressive? Blah, blah, blah. Which, as we both know, they're not ready. He just has maybe only half of them ready. And he has to defend multiple fronts because,
Yeah.
one thing that will also happen in the Middle East, you know, there's a little bit of fighting with the Vichy French, like well before Torch. And also for a while, there was like a pro-German uprising in Iran. So,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
British had to deal with that. So, I do feel like he's been unfairly criticized by
Yes,
Churchill.
he does, and even in the Pacific War, he is too. He has a
Yeah.
tragic career. He's one
Uh,
of those guys where they say he gets promotions, but they're actually demotions. You know, because they don't want to insult
Ouch.
him and his career, so he kind of gets shoved off to these cushiony positions, but they just don't want him in the front. And yeah, the British they've replaced a lot of people to yeah, a lot of commanders
True
get
enough.
replaced. But
True enough,
the
but at least I'll just adding to that, right? Britain overall in the war, they did started to weed out more ineffective commanders. Like some of
yeah,
the good commanders also were casualties in this, but mostly they did weed out really ineffective guys, which really helped. And when we talk about like the performance of the Italian generals like Graziani, and like when we get into Tunisia, the supreme commanders and all, yeah, I think it becomes obvious. Like Britain made a much smarter choice by at least getting rid of most of the incompetent guys.
yeah, no, that's for sure. And the Western Desert Force, it's going to be 36,000 men strong, consisting of 14 non-brigaded battalions of British infantry. They're going to have the 7th Armored Division, so that's their heaviest hitter for most of the, oh, let's say almost the entire North African campaign. They got the 2nd New Zealand Division, the 4th Indian Infantry Division, and the 7th Support Group. By June of 1940, the Royal Air Force in the Middle East has just over 200 aircraft, and a couple of those are Hawker Hurricanes. So it's comfortable to say they don't have air supremacy at the beginning, but they're gradually going to
They have
gain
an
it.
advantage. Let's just
Yeah,
say they have an advantage.
and the Royal Navy, they're going to reign supreme. You already listed the numbers. The Italians could have fought them or tried to do something, but they don't. So it's kind of a nonsensical thing to even talk about, I guess, at this point. But
Which is actually it's just like one thing is like you mentioned the Italians following the fleet in being strategy.
yeah,
Usually, Navy would do that if they kind of have inferior numbers, like
yes,
not as much as the leading navy, which is like something what Germany did in World War One, which that I can agree makes some sense, but at the same time, Italy could have pressed the offensive, and they might have. I don't know how it could have turned out because we do know seamanship counts was quite a bit, but the numbers, one lucky shot can change the entire battle.
yeah, absolutely. And they had a force that could have at least challenged, even if I mean the whole point of the fleet and being is they're terrified of losing said fleet because of the cost of the capital ships, which I don't think Italy should have even had. I think they should have gone for a Jeune d'école strategy, smaller ships, faster ships, something to challenge the British ships, but not to contest them in some surface battle with battleships because that was never going to happen. But well, it doesn't really happen, so yeah. But to explain to the audience, this is going to be a little bit harder for them to visualize. But I mean, if you can picture in your mind North Africa, you got to imagine that where the coast is in North Africa, there's kind of we'll call it like this highway. It doesn't stretch across the whole thing, but it's been partially
Yeah.
built up and it's an all-weather road, nothing paved well or anything like that. But it's at least a road where you know where you're going, because if you drive into the desert, you'll get lost, and this actually will happen in the story. And the
Ouch.
Italians, yeah, yeah, the Italians had built up. They called it the Via Balbia, and it ran along the
Mm-hmm.
coast. They were very reluctant to go off of it, which that
Mm-hmm.
seems obvious. And there was it was a double-edged sword because yes, it allowed the Italians to safely move somewhere, knowing where they're going, but it also allowed the British to know exactly where they were, and the British would be attacking them with naval bombardment, but more or less it's the Royal Air Force. The Royal Air Force is going to attack any Italian trucks they see or armored vehicles, any columns, and you just have to imagine everything that Italy is sending east is getting hit by British aircraft.
Yeah. And I mean, like, it's also just more terrifying, also on morale, knowing that they're continuously getting hit from land and sea. And, even though they are ordered to dig, right? Because when they start their invasion, like the first week of September, right? Which is at this point in time in 1940, like a couple of weeks before Sea Lion was scheduled to start.
Yeah.
So, and Graziani only attacks because, Mussolini said, attack or I'm going to sack you.
Yeah, pretty
So,
much. And the British estimated the
and
Italians were about 200,000 men strong. So, I mean, they were heavily outnumbered, but that's a pretty insane amount.
yeah, and I think that's why I think, like, the idea was to let them overstretch the supply lines.
Yes.
And that's why, initially the Italians make a lot of advances into Egypt. I think they advance like, I don't know, 50, 60 miles, I guess.
Yeah,
Like
but
you can keep into the, and
but
then they get held up because, logistics.
yeah, Graziani, I mean, it's absolutely insane to imagine. Basically, if you're looking at North Africa, the Italians are almost on the complete western end. I mean, the French are over there, but nearly there. And they're going to have to travel an incredible amount to get to what are the front lines, so just in front of the Egyptian border. And just that is taking, like, you have to imagine 50% of the
Okay,
fuel
fuel.
is lost just in the trucks getting it over there. It's an enormous cost just to move this amount of water, men, provisions, ammunition, and such. And as far as a logistical supply line is concerned, what you bring with you, you're going to have to depend on for a long time because it's going to take forever for stuff to come over.
And actually, like, this is one thing that, both sides will experience when the British are getting pushed back towards Egypt. That actually improves their supply situation because their supply line is shortened. And the
Yep.
same thing actually happens to the Axis forces, like, multiple times when they get pushed back west, they actually get more supplies because, the problems keep changing.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I think this is like, one thing I did read recently from, like, it's a Royal Army, I think, website. It said, the ration given to every British soldier fighting in North Africa for the water, right, per day was 4.5 liters.
It's
And
significant.
a good chunk of that would be towards cooking and topping up the vehicle radiators because, as we all know, this is gonna be brutal on both man and machine.
Yep. And yeah, lack of water is actually gonna hurt Rommel later on. It's one of those things. Logistics wins wars, and takes fuel, takes water to get all this over to one side of the desert, and the Axis didn't have enough of it, so they should have. This was never. This was not a place where they could have won a war of attrition, to say the least. They need quick victory, and they do
It
not get
had
it.
to be the quickest,
Yeah.
and since the British just even grew from strength to strength,
Yep.
I think that as time wore on, like it's like, it's just like now, like you might as well have just told them to try to just go to Vegas or something.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Might have had more luck.
So to talk about the front lines a little bit, the
Mhm.
Libya-Egyptian border contains kind of like a lot of old and new forts that have been made, and some of them are named Fort Capuzzo, Skiga, and Grubba. And there's four lines of high stakes and concrete bases laced with barbed wire. So we're not talking about defensive boxes yet in North Africa because that's going to be a bit later. But there's these kind of like fortifications, there's trenches, man lines. Kind of the greatest defensive attributes in this campaign is minefields, barbed
Yeah.
wire, machine gun placements behind, concrete pillboxes and such. That's what you're kind of looking at visually.
Mhm.
And the British actually know the Italians are about to invade because during World War II, the British intelligence reigned supreme. They always had the edge when it came to that. And they actually elected to seize the initiative. So the Italians spent a lot of time getting their forces over to where would be like the front lines. And instead, the British just attack them right away. I mean, it's not a formidable attack, it's a raid. And it's a raid
Yeah.
aimed at a lot of these places that are just garrisoned. The area itself is referred to as the frontier wire, and it's kind of a defensive fortification over the border. And basically, the British 11th Hussars in Rolls-Royce armored cars, they stormed the garrison at a place called Sidi Omar, And the Italians, some of them don't even know they're at war. It's so out of nowhere. There's many men that are captured in different places. And I guess you would say it's kind of embarrassing for the Italians. It's nothing too much lost, but it kind of sucks to be raided when it was supposed to be you invading Egypt, you know?
Yeah. It's like, like they just like it's more of a morale thing because,
Yeah.
Richard O'Connor, who was the general who led that operation, it was just like a couple of brigades, right? 10,000 men that went with him
Yep.
on
It's
this
a small
attack.
force. And that was,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, 1/3 of the Western Desert Force right now. So
Yeah. On the 14th, the 7th Hussars, supported by elements of the 1st Royal Tank Regiment and some Gloucester Gladiators of the 33rd Squadron, they capture Fort Capuzzo. So this is one of the more formidable locations in the Frontier Wire, I'd say. And it is going to change hands an unbelievable amount of times. Like you hear about Fort Capuzzo a lot. The 11th Hussars also capture Fort Madalena. On the 16th, the 10th Army, they're forming up, and they're going to be finally close enough to push the British back over the border. But again, this British attack was just a raid, so they had no intent to actually defend or do anything here. They're just going to go right back over the border.
yeah, but I'm just thinking of it like, you mass your forces to counterattack and take it back, but that's just now resources wasted.
Yeah, and everything in these forts, so if stockpiles of fuel, ammunition, rations, and all that, the British would steal all this and destroy whatever they couldn't grab. So
I mean, the amount of times the Axis and allies would like, live off each other's captured stuff
very
throughout this
true.
entire campaign is it's quite mind-boggling in a way.
Yeah, definitely. Rommel, I mean, because Rommel, he would spend the entire North African campaign begging and begging for fuel, and
Yeah.
no one could give it to him. I mean, at one point, the Italian Navy took fuel out of their ships to give to Rommel. It was that desperate, and it was never enough. So Rommel had to live off of just British supply dumps that were scattered all over the desert during World War
True
II.
enough.
But yeah, Colonel Davanzo, he was attacked by the 11th and 7th Hussars, and this prompted him to perform a defensive square, and he was quickly encircled, and his forces were annihilated. So the very beginning of what was this invasion of Egypt is actually kind of a disaster. The British end up destroying 12 light tanks, they like take 4 guns, and they kill or capture about 100 Italian infantry. So that's
Yeah.
the first significant action, I guess you could say, that happens in this frontier wire.
Mhm.
And the Italians are still, it's going to take them quite a lot of time to bring over all the forces necessary to perform the invasion. So in the meantime, they're kind of just like patrolling and raiding each other over the border. And that's going to go on for a good portion of the early half of June. And,
Yeah.
a lot of saboteurs, commandos from the British side are going to try and find Italian ammunition dumps and just blow them up and such. And, whatever, like I said, at the captured forts, if they can go back and raid, they will try to do that.
Yeah,
By
but I
the,
think the British were quite successful in these raids, and just
oh, yeah.
disrupting the advance, which definitely like, Balbo and then Graziani when he took over, right? This has also caused a lot of hesitancy for them to even want to attack because at the very least they all wanted to like, we need to build up the supplies to sustain an offensive. But, the boss back home is not gonna accept that.
Yeah, I don't even think I mentioned in the podcast the original commander Balbo. He didn't want to do this. He told Mussolini he thought it was insane. He said he kind of gave him estimates for what they needed, just to point out it wasn't like logical to do what they were doing. And I think is it Balbo that gets in a plane crash. He dies, I believe, tragically, and Graziani comes into it, and then he kind of seconds what Balbo says. He also doesn't believe in the invasion, but Mussolini demands it, and like you had said before, you get sacked if you don't go along with it. So he unfortunately has to perform a campaign he doesn't even want to do, which those usually don't end up going well.
Yeah. And I think because I think the reason why these generals, like when they don't want to fight, they usually have to try to convince a dictator or something like, hey, the reason we cannot do it is because of military. And that's probably like their only hope of like, trying to persuade this. I think at least compared to Mussolini and then, later Hitler, the generals on the ground at least seem to have a better understanding of what logistics is really playing to, like,
Absolutely.
how it's hamstringing their forces, how it is just ruining their advance or momentum.
Yeah. And by the end of June, the 10th Army is now concentrating around Bardia to Tobruk. And they formed this group called the Mileti Group, who's going to be spearheading some attacks to recapture all of those forts in the frontier wire that are still being held by British raiders. On the 29th of June, the Italians managed to recapture Fort Capuzzo, and the Mileti Group repulses some British tanks and artillery attacks. By August the 13th, which is going in time some bit, the British, they cease their raids and activity, and they're now trying to conserve their strength because they're expecting at any moment the grand invasion of Egypt is going to happen.
Yeah.
Now, this invasion, Balbo's intent is he wants to coincide with the July German invasion of Britain. So, like I had said before, he's hoping for Operation Sea Lion to happen. Never happens because it was impossible, to be honest. There was no way the Germans were ever going to pull it off. But Balbo, he orders all the trucks and his his M11 39 medium tanks from the 5th Army to be delivered from Italy to reinforce the 10th Army. So he's already begging for reinforcements. And they're going to cross the frontier wire to seize Solom once war is declared. Because, like I said, the British had stole the initiative and just like attacked right away. The British raids really disrupted a lot of those plans. So everything's going to be postponed quite a bit.
I mean, it's like an entire month.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to take a while. June the 28th, Balbo, who is Italy's most famous airman, he did die. Okay, I have it here in my notes. Yeah, okay, oh yeah, okay, now I remember why. It's really tragic. So he was flying over to take command of something, and the Italian aircraft gunners shot him down by accident. So he was killed by his own people.
Ouch. That's just, I mean, like, now I really want to see why in the Six-Day War, like, the radars were turned off when the cabinet was flying.
Yeah.
But,
And
Graziani was then, I guess, appointed, right, to the Supreme Commander.
yeah, Rodolfo Graziani, he succeeds Balbo, which sucks to be him in my opinion, and he inherits this invasion order. So you got to imagine you're a commander. There's an invasion already being quote unquote performed, and now you just got to pick up the pieces, and you don't have much options. You kind of have to go with whatever was already being done. That's not always the case, but it's going to be the case here. Graziani, he was as reluctant as his predecessor. Duh. And the plan is for it to all kick off around August the 22nd with a limited advance against Solom and Shwani, El Ajirin. Sorry if I mispronounced these locations. And they're going to be employing 3 columns advancing over 3 lines. The idea is after taking Solom, the advance will then be against Sidi Barani. This would be considered. They don't know if they're going to actually be capable of even taking Solom and being in good enough state to continue. But if everything goes well, that's where they're going to go. And you hear, doing research for these kinds of campaigns, you hear about what commanders think, especially Japanese commanders. It's always funny of like, okay, here's the secondary target, the third target, and it's never happens, but they had plans if things went magically for them. The plan ultimately
the keyword magically for them.
Yeah. The plan ultimately crumbles because the non-motorized infantry are unable to keep up with the motorized infantry because it's August in a desert as they are marching. So I'd imagine a lot of guys are falling down from heat stroke.
Or at the most, they are advancing at a snail's pace.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't even fault them.
Yeah, it would have absolutely sucked. I mean, I'm obviously I cover the Pacific War, and the Pacific War has some of the worst locations known to man. Some of these islands or Burma, for example, are absolutely hellscapes. But North Africa is a very special hell of its own, I'd say.
It's let's call it yellow hell, okay?
Yeah, it's yellow hell. And Mussolini, he hears about all of the delays in his head and the stalling, and he just tells Graziani, if you don't start this soon, you're going to get sacked. which, I don't know. It would have been interesting. Graziani gets sacked, and then a third guy has to come in and just pick up the pieces. That would have not looked good for the men.
I mean, he's picking up the pieces of the pieces.
Yeah. So Graziani, he has to come up with a third invasion plan because things delay again, and now it's scheduled for September the 9th. And Sidi Barani is the key objective. The non-motorized divisions, they're going to advance along the coastal road, attacking through the Halfaya Pass, which is going to become very famous in this campaign. They're going to occupy Salom, and then they're going to attack Sidi Barani. To describe the Halfaya Pass, it's a narrowing between escarpments, and it's, I guess you call it like a bottleneck. And it's just a place where you can heavily fortify, you can place mines, all your anti-tank guns. So whoever's coming up in armor it's very dangerous for armor. So it makes it just an excellent location to fortify.
So it's a really good choke point for the defenses and like to
exactly.
funnel the defenses, right?
Yep.
And then Sidi Barani, I guess, was quite important because it was, I guess, a port, right, to kind of look at alleviating some of the supply issues.
Yep. There's a lot of smaller ports. Of course, the big ports that we always talk about is Tobruk, Benghazi, Tripoli for the Axis. You got Alexandria, of course, for the British. But there's like 50 small ports that can accommodate small amounts of, amphibious attacks. A little bit of supplies can trickle in. And overall, the British will have the advantage when it comes to moving supply by sea. And the Axis they're simply not going to have this. It's not going to be relevant to them. Even when they hold Tobruk, like moving any supplies with convoys to Tobruk means that they're under the RAF, and the RAF can just take out those convoys or attack Tobruk itself. Yeah. And part of the Italian strategy is they're going to have a southern column of the Libyan division and the Mileti group. So the Mileti group, we'll call them kind of like they're a little elite armored group at the moment, and they want to do kind of a sweep in the south to attack along the Dair al-Hamra Biyar. Oh my god, I'm gonna mispronounce this one. Rabia Bir Emba track, and this is to outflank the British. So if you're looking at a map, basically in general, they're trying to go south through some very treacherous, no road desert to sneak up on the British. The Mileti group, as they're beginning to perform this operation, they do so with zero knowledge of how to actually navigate a desert, nor any navigation equipment whatsoever.
Oh,
so
boy.
We'll take a wild guess at what happens to the Mileti group.
Does that involve going a bit in circles, having casualties and delays?
Yeah. And something that was interesting when I was doing the episode for Kingston Generals, I wanted to get, anybody, you could just go on Wikipedia and you honestly could get a very good rundown of the North African campaign. But the one thing that Wikipedia doesn't do so well is go into the finer points of like military strategy, if like a commander was trying to innovate and do something that was off the books and such. And over here, the Italians, I found out they had developed a new revolutionary doctrine of combined arms.
Okay.
So for World War II, I mean, this is the age, this is the Blitzkrieg and everything. This is very popular. So this is in 1938. And they had based this off of lessons they had learned in the Spanish Civil War and their really gross war with Ethiopia, which is like one of the anyways, Italy should have got more flack for what happened in Ethiopia. And the doctrine, they called it the War of Rapid Decision. And the Italian forces in Libya, they had all the necessary elements to successfully carry this out. They were trained for this. They had the right equipment. And just basically to explain what this is, the idea is for a fully motorized force to quickly perform outflanking maneuvers to hit the enemy on their flanks or their rear and to quickly seize objectives. So for anybody who knows World War II, it's like a blitzkrieg.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say, it's just like, well, the blitzkrieg is to just go around like their rear and cut off their supplies. This is somewhat the same thing, but you also hit them in the flanks.
Yeah. Whereas the Germans, they call it to hit the focal point in the defensive line that's weak, but use all of your armor all at once, go through, and then hit the rear which looks like
Yeah.
you're going through a line and then circling back. For this, it's more about flanking around, and then you would call it leapfrogging from one objective to one objective. So you're cutting the lines of communication, you're cutting the supply lines to the enemy.
Okay.
So instead of attacking a heavily fortified line and losing all of your infantry or something, you try to just cut it at the butt and force the surrender of everybody because they can't hold out long enough. And the Italians, they had learned a lot of these lessons, so they would have had an edge actually on the British, because the British would have not had this much experience yet with ground operations, because Dunkirk happened way too quickly.
Yeah.
And they don't use it. So
Wow.
yeah, this
I
one
mean,
book I
like,
read spent a long time explaining how this was very innovative, how the Italian commanders were proud of this, how they had trained specifically to use this. And it very much is like a blitzkrieg. It's requires speed, deep penetration, rear flanks, and all that. And Graziani had actually used it effectively in Ethiopia, and he chooses not to employ it. Instead, he
I
assembled.
think this is really like, what the hell? Like, it's one thing if it's like a commander's never even used it before,
Yeah.
but this is just like taking the cake.
Yeah, so this one author, I forget which book it was. I don't have the bibliography on me, but Graziani was someone who had used it, trained for it, his men were trained for it. He had the necessary equipment to do it, and he doesn't do it. And he got cold feet, I guess. And he assembles his fully motorized force to quickly capture a location. So Mursa Matru, which is kind of like on the border there, he goes after that, and he allows his non-motorized units to garrison later. So to explain to the audience, it's like he's taking his quickest units and he's throwing them frontally to try and take a location so that the slower infantry who are marching on foot can kind of catch up. But by doing
Mm-hmm.
so, you can't outrun your infantry so much, so you're limiting the amount of speed for your armor. And I'm realizing I'm doing things with my hands on camera, and most people are listening to this in an audiobook, audio on an audio podcast. But it's like fighting with one hand tied behind your back. You're not using the full capability of your mobile forces, so it's
I
useless.
think maybe I'll just add to this because Mesa Matrut was also, I think one reason he might have targeted is like it's on that coastal road, let's call it
Yes.
that, right? And so at least I guess the feeling was maybe, at least moving on the roads is faster for any unit versus going to the desert.
Yeah.
But, he, like, as you said, the reason why the German Blitzkrieg was so successful was they kind of like gave all the infantry pervitin so that they could operate literally like super soldiers for 3 days and night without rest.
Yeah.
So as you said, the armor accelerates away. The gap is going to get so big that their entire armored units would be cut off and just destroyed piecemeal by the British, and then that's it. Their only, I guess, their greatest striking power is out of the equation now for good.
Yeah. And the strategy that he's adopted to try and, I guess you could say, concentrate his forces together isn't necessarily stupid, but the problem is they're traversing the coastal road where the British fully know and can see where they are, and they will be hitting them with their aircraft the entire time. So he is forcing his most precious armored vehicles to be basically casualties for no reason. They could have done a lot of other operations. So he's starting this off on the bad foot. Let's just say that.
I mean, I
And
think
yeah,
it's just like one thing I just wonders, like, you know, Graziani has the name, no, the Butcher of Fezan,
yeah,
like that was his nickname, and makes it sound like so great, and that, like he's having complete cold feet, completely out of his depth in this campaign.
yep. And he's going to open up the campaign with some airstrikes. So some Fiat CR-42s are going to be clashing with gladiators over East Libya and the Western Egyptian skies. And bombers are back. Basically, their bombers and their fighters are just attacking each other's locations. As the Italian 23rd Corps of the 10th Army, they're going to go and they're going to attack Sidi Barani. The motorized division, they're going to shuttle forward over in about 650 vehicles, but the non-motorized divisions, they're forced to march a grueling nearly 100 kilometers, which is going to be slow.
God.
Yeah. And
And
Graziani,
torturous, like with the
yeah.
weather.
Graziani, he elected to advance in a mass column, like I said, over the coastline. So he's basically crippled himself to oppose any enemy counterattacks. He's hoping his force in numbers will overwhelm the British, but he's left himself extremely vulnerable. So he's actually giving the edge to the British to be able to hit him.
Is it due to the fact that the British can hit on the flanks now because they're
Yeah,
in a column? The
yeah,
frontal firepower is just it's not there, right? When you're in a
yeah.
column.
And the British are going to enjoy. I mean, they can navally bombard him, they can use air attacks, and they can flank him because the British are going to have better reconnaissance and better knowledge of terrain during this. Despite Italy's aircraft's efforts, the RAF, they raid Tobruk, they attack some Italian airfields, supply depots, and they harass the hell out of his advancing columns. And the reconnaissance intercepts a lot of the Italian units, and they discover that the
Okay.
Italians are having some troubles. So specifically, they can see that this Mileti group that's in the south gets hopelessly lost. Like they're just lost out in the desert. The Mileti group actually ends up having to call for Italian aircraft to help perform a reconnaissance to get them where they need to go. And it's actually going to end up in the Mileti group not showing up to their objective on time and ruining the entire invasion. So yeah, it was not a good strategy on the Mileti
Or
group's
at least
part.
you should have, or you should have at least given hey, how do I navigate with the compass in a desert? That's quite important
Yeah, and
because
also go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, unlike the plains in Europe or something where you might have some features that you can distinguish,
Yeah,
some hills or mountain ranges or whatever. Those are like, yep, I see sand
unfortunately,
here and I see sand
yeah,
there.
that's it. As soon as you leave, like as soon as you go any further south from the coastal road, it's just unbelievable desert, and you don't know where you're going. And also, their vehicles are getting just hampered by the extreme heat and the sand. So a lot of them are breaking down on them as well. Because the Italians, unlike the British, they didn't have any special oil for desert warfare, and they didn't have proper air filters.
Yeah.
So not good for them. On the 10th,
You
the
know,
11th, oh, yeah, go ahead.
I was just seeing the map. It's quite interesting that, the British, at least almost to the line of Sidi Barrani from Egypt, actually had a railway line there.
Yeah, the Italians have a railway line that goes 30 kilometers over, I think it's near Tripoli, and the British have theirs that's very close to Alexandria. But overall, there is no railway line that goes across the coastal road over like the 1,500 or so kilometers long that it is. So it would have been great if either side had a real railway line connection to bring troops to the front, like you'd see in World War One, for example.
Yeah.
But honestly, there's not going to be any armored train warfare or any railway line stuff in this. You see it in like the Middle East, I guess, but not here.
Oh, it's quite interesting because it could have saved so much build-up
Fuel,
time.
yeah, fuel, manpower, time,
Feel
everything.
true.
Um, Trains would have made everything easier, but unfortunately, they're using trucks. And Rommel's going to be screaming later on for trucks they'll never get. And so the Mileti group, they delayed the entire Italian invasion. It's an embarrassing situation for Graziani, and he has to make a fourth invasion plan. So we're on the fourth plan now. It's this bad for them. So the invasion was set for September the 13th, with Sidi Barrani being the key objective. And now it's going to be the 10th Army with only 5 divisions as a result of the transport shortages and the Mileti group not being able to advance quick enough. They're going to try and capture Salam, and then they're going to try and head through Bukbuk to Sidi Barrani. So it's still
Okay.
generally the same plan. From there, the 10th Army is going to fortify Sidi Barrani and help transport supplies up to it. They expect British counterattacks. So basically, the overall strategy is to kind of seize this objective and then hunker down and hope to really hit the British when they come to, recapture it.
So kind of like, hope that the British come in force and then, our defenses will blast them to bits.
Yeah, it's almost like luring them out because they know the British are a much smaller force and they want to overwhelm them. They want the British to come after their concentration of numbers. It's not a bad
Fair enough.
strategy. On the
No,
13th, yep.
it's just, I guess, with such a thing, I'm just wondering, like, how will the British come? Because I guess unless they expected, like, only a frontal assault of that coastal road.
Yeah, pretty
right?
much. On the 13th, the 1st Division crosses the Egyptian border. They recapture Fort Capuzzo, and then they go against Mossad, and that's captured as well. The Italians begin with an artillery barrage followed up by an advance under rolling barrage, or I guess you would call it a creeping barrage, against Salom's
Yeah.
airfield, and it has an empty barracks because the British had just left it there. The Italians advance along the coastal road again, and their 1st Libyan division is harassed by the 3rd Coldstream Guards around Salom. So they're holding that area down. Both sides are unleashing heavy artillery upon each other and their aircraft. So every single battle, there's just aircraft fighting. And the British are
Okay.
making a fighting withdrawal towards the Halfaya Pass as the 1st Libyan Division captures Salom. So the British, their overall strategy was a fighting withdrawal, just to kind of bring the Italians further and further in to make their logistics that much worse.
Yeah.
And the Italians, they continue their march, and they're facing, I'd say, moderate casualties from mines that are left behind the British. So, ironically, it's one of those kind of campaigns where the thing that's killing you the most is not necessarily the hot combat. It's more of like the mines being left around.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but like the amount of mines that we see in this campaign overall is just staggering.
yeah. There's I mean, it's going to be more extravagant later with Rommel and the what do you
True
call it?
enough.
The desert boxes. I can't remember what he calls them. Desert hell. Oh, hell gardens or desert gardens, where he makes these boxes
Something
where
with
the
garden,
mines.
that
Yeah,
much I remember, yeah.
yeah, and they're just heavily fortified points where guys are basically in the middle of minefields, and then they're just waiting for armor to come at them. But yeah, back to the battle. On the 14th, the Italians approach the Halfaya Pass, and they're harassed by a company, again, of the 3rd Coldstream Guards, Northumberland Fusilier Platoon. Oh, I say that because of my French, but the Fusilier. Actually, how do you say that in English?
Fusiliers.
Fusiliers, okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry, Quebec. It's a common word. The Fusiliers platoon and some artillery. And the Allies, they're continuing their fighting withdrawal. The Italians are continuously failing to entrap them. So they're trying to hook around and like actually trap and capture men, but they never are able to. And during the night, 2 columns of the 2nd Libyan Division, the 63rd Infantry Serene Division, and the Maletti Group from Musad, as well as the 62nd Infantry Division from Sidi Omar, they're converging upon the Hafaya Pass. So there's a concentration of all the Italian forces basically in this bottleneck. On the
I mean, it
15th,
just sounds like they are trying to just overwhelming force for like what, 200 guys.
yeah, basically. On the 15th, the Italian forces are on the escarpment, which is extremely rough terrain that can't be traversed by armor, at least not well, if at all. And they're advancing through the pass, linking up with others to keep advancing towards Salom. A squadron of the 11th Hussars and the 2nd Rifle Brigade, as well as the 1st Royal Tank Regiment, they begin harassing the Italians on the escarpment. Excuse me. And around noon, the British forces they begin to withdraw along the coastal road to Bukbuk, where they link up with the 11th Hussars and the Moraes Company of Les Troupes de Marine. So there's actually some French troops in this. But by the end of the day, the British are continuing their fighting withdrawal to Alam Hamid, then to Alam El Dab. So the British are just doing what they were planning to do in the campaign, try to cause as many casualties and hamper the Italians until they're going to make a stand somewhere. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, and at the same time, like overextend the supply lines.
Yeah. The Italians continue their advance. They're suffering heavier and heavier casualties the closer they get, and they're still unable to pin down the enemy and destroy them. So, for the Italians, it's kind of a necessity that they capture a large amount of these British before they get behind extremely fortified lines. Because all these places they're fighting, these aren't they're not static defensive lines. These are hastily fortified places. They're not meant to be held. On the 16th, elements of the 1st Tank Group, followed by the 1st and 2nd Libyan Divisions, they advanced to Bir Thidan el Kadim, and at Alam el Dab, 50 Italian tanks, motorized infantry, and artillery begin a flanking maneuver where they force the Coldstream Guards to withdraw before they're surrounded. That night, the 1st Libyan Division, the 1st 23rd Marzo Division, and the 23rd Corps Artillery, just southeast of Sidi Barani, they're going to continue advancing. And the famous Maleti group, they're still further west, unable to fully participate in the offensive because they're facing logistical problems. It's actually a lot of their vehicles are getting worn and torn, and
Yeah.
repairing them on the spot isn't working out. It's actually going to be the first 23rd Marzio Division who finally captures Sidi Barani. So this is the big key objective for the Italians.
So
North,
Graziani's first objective, right?
yeah. North of the escarpment, the British forces, they're pulling back to the coastal road as the RAF and the Squadron 5 are like sweeping each other and just doing their aerial combat. And yeah, forward airfields are being bombed daily. So the Italians and the British are just trying to knock out each other's air superiority. It's pretty equal for now. Now,
Yeah.
basically, the Italian invasion has kind of been snuffed out. So it's stagnant. It wasn't the quick, easy victory that they envisioned. The Italians, they don't suffer tremendous casualties. It's about 120 deaths, 410 wounded. But I think what's more crucial to this in the North African campaign is they lost a large number of tanks and motorized vehicles. A lot of it was due to mechanical failures. For the
And I
Italian
think I'll
air,
just add one thing, sorry,
yeah, go for it.
is, in this theater, while they did end up advancing, like, I guess, like 100 kilometers or something from the frontiers at the start of the
Yeah,
invasion. But at the same time, ultimately that still was an invasion, like an advance of 100 kilometers in a week,
yeah, of
which,
course.
considering the size of North Africa, like how much that was
Oh, it's a
agonizingly
formidable.
slow.
I mean, it's formidable in the amount of territory that they gained. But as we're going to see when it comes to the North African campaign, taking territory and holding it are two different things. Both the Axis and Allies will go literally across half of North Africa in what is like a single campaign. And then they
Yeah.
will be at the uttermost point where the logistical line fails and they can't maintain a defensive line, and then they lose it, and then they're pushed all the way back, and it's going to just keep
Yeah.
happening like two boxers fighting.
Yeah. I think what I was just trying to say is, like, given the size, they
Yeah,
can't afford such slow advances, especially for, as the British are building up strength now.
of course. The British, they barely have any casualties. They have 40 deaths, large number of wounded, 10 tanks are lost, 11 armored cars, and 4 lorries. But again, the British are closer to Alexandria, and their repair shops are throughout the North African campaign going to be way better at repairing their vehicles. Their vehicles all have common parts. Their crews are ready to repair them. The Axis are actually going to really suffer when it comes to repairing their vehicles. And it takes a lot longer because their repair shops are usually far out in places like Tripoli or Benghazi and stuff. But yeah, it's I don't want to say it's a lackluster start to this series, but for the Italians, it's not the grand invasion they envisioned, and it bogged down. So it stops basically here for now. Now,
No, true enough, it's not a big start because, the forces are quite small, especially if you just now juxtapose this to, like, the Battle of France that happened like a few months
yeah,
ago.
it's definitely
But
not the
at
Battle of
this,
France.
but as we will see in the series, it's gonna have its own, like, not a lot of intricacies between both sides amongst their high command. And it's gonna get this entire theater is gonna get a lot more attention. And when as the Americans come in, this is the first time they go head to head against the German soldiers. That's in North Africa.
Yep. The I mean, I think we already explained it. The real reason why the Italian invasion bogs down is because the infantry can't keep up with the mobile armor. They didn't have to. Graziani, he could have performed something along the lines of a blitzkrieg. He could have swung, attacked, took a location, and then tried to hold it with armor, and then wait the grueling amount of days, if not weeks, for the infantry to finally come and garrison it. But I guess you'd say he tried to play it safe, and he just tried to force combat en masse. And it was a slow, cumbersome move, but it gave the British more and more time to reinforce, to plan, to fortify, and it's going to bite the Italians in the ass later. And
Yeah.
the British had expected the Italians to make a large flanking maneuver further south of the coastal roads, and they had actually concentrated a large number of their forces south of the escarpment. That's why when I was mentioning some of the combat, it was the Coldstream Guards who were kind of left alone with some artillery on the coast because they didn't expect the Italians to only be there. So the Coldstream Guards kind of, they were like,
They
oh
took
my
the brunt
God,
of it.
yeah, we're facing the full weight of the Italian invasion, basically. The British had assumed the fight would be around Mersa Matruh. So Wavell, he began
Mhm.
pulling his troops back there. He ordered the 7th Armored Division to mount a defense at Mersa Matruh. But the Italians, they just they got to Sidi Barani, and it's airfield located at Sofifi, and they just dug in. So that's gonna kind of be it, really. When you look at this episode, there's going to be a huge counterattack, but for now, Graziani, he's sending word back to Mussolini, and he's claiming, like everybody, oh, the British, they had retreated in disorder. It's a grand victory. He even tells, I think, Mussolini that like half the British armor was taken down. And I mean, this is clearly not true. The British had,
I'll just say this. I just sometimes that like, any side makes these exaggerated claims. I'm like,
yeah.
I just find it so amusing.
Yeah, and I mean, but the truth of it is the British were fighting a fighting withdrawal, and the British had done more damage than the Italians, so effectively the British had done what they needed to do. And now the Italians are going to be facing quite a situation because, yes, they have invaded Egypt technically, but they're at way beyond their logistical capabilities. And anything that they're going to need to invade better be on hand because the British will be able, with much shorter logistical lines, to hammer them back. But that's going to come in
Yeah.
next episode. I guess.
Yep. That's one of the most underrated operations that we will be covering. I think
Yeah.
it's not
I,
given its own due.
I will say it here now. I was really worried when Kings and Generals wanted me to do the series. Most textbooks don't even talk about this. They kind of just say, "Oh, so there was some raids in a paragraph, some stuff happened, and then the Italians are preparing for an invasion, but it just bogs down." And they don't talk about this minor engagement, but I wanted to, hit everything that happens in North Africa as much as I could. So it's kind of the lackluster beginning to what is going to be a much more exciting campaign. So, in the next few episodes, the audience, there's going to be a lot of tank warfare and a lot of interesting situations with commanders losing their minds over logistical problems. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to this series so much because, like there are so many aspects I want to discuss. Next episodes of Key Operation being one of them.
Yep. So again, thank you, Gaurav, for joining me in this series. And we'll be talking very soon when we're going to be covering the next, God knows how many episodes of this.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for
All
having
right.
me on here.
Thank you. This has been the Pacific War
Thanks.
Channel. Over and out.